The use of jogging and steady-state cardio runs in football was extremely popular in the past decades, with old-school coaches using unorthodox training methods in the hope that their players would get properly conditioned to play a 90-minute game with ease. As the years went on, and with sports science information and data being more accessible to teams and coaches, even at the amateur level, this phenomenon hasn't stopped, but at least it got limited. Are we heading in the right direction though? Should you jog or run at a steady state as a footballer for extended periods of time? Let's find out. For all of you that are following us on Instagram, you might already know my view on the topic. So I personally think that jogging and steady-state cardio in general is way too overrated in the football world, especially amongst amateur players and old-school coaches. On one hand, amateur and youth players who don't have access to professional coaching staff perceive steady-state running as the most effective way to improve their stamina and get game fit. Although this may be true to some extent, it definitely becomes a limiting factor along the way that can really stall their progress in the long term if it is used as the main training method. On the other hand, old school coaches perceive this type of conditioning as effective for various reasons. So one could argue that the game they were playing and their speed of play had nothing to do with the demands of modern football, where intensity plays a game-changing role. Another reason this might be the case is the limited amount of informational resources they had access to growing up as players and coaches, which can oftentimes lead to certain ideas and principles being planted inside your brain regardless of whether they're effective or not. You just perceive them as effective because you haven't been exposed to higher quality training stimuli. So yeah, jogging, steady-state cardio, way too overrated. But why? Let's start off by saying that jogging and steady-state cardio can be the same but also different things. Steady-state cardio is any form of cardiovascular activity that is executed at a specific and steady pace for the whole duration of the activity. On the flip side, jogging is a form of steady-state cardio that is executed at a pretty low pace as perceived by the general pop. So why are these forms of cardio overrated? First of all, football has changed. The times when football was played with players just walking around with a ball with limited to no pressure being applied to them are gone. The game has become much more intense both on and off the ball. Players aren't only required to travel more distance during a game, but moreover, they're required to cover more distance at a high intensity. Nowadays, intensity has become the factor that sets apart different levels of football, not volume, aka total distance run. Of course, we would be blind to not accept the fact that volume and aerobic capacity don't play an equally important role in sustaining a certain level of peak performance throughout the whole game. On average, a field player covers anywhere between 8 to 12 kilometers during a football match, depending on his position. This can be experienced both in the lower amateur levels as well as the pro and elite tiers of football. So basically, if you want to be effective and showcase the football you can play with efficiency, you need to have the aerobic capacity to stay active both on and off the ball for at least 7 to 8 kilometers, no matter what level you're playing at, amateur to elite level. Having said that, if you want to climb up the ladder of pro football, you won't only need the aerobic but also the anaerobic capacity of the level you're aspiring to reach. You want to develop your conditioning to get game fit and be able to sustain a certain level of high performance during the whole match. In order to do that, you need to meet the demands of your level and progressively shoot beyond them. If you're able to travel more distance at a high intensity, you will certainly be more effective as a footballer. For example, if an amateur central midfielder covers about 9 kilometers per game, only 3 to 400 meters of that volume will be covered at a high intensity. On the flip side, an elite level central midfielder like Kevin De Bruyne or N'Golo Kante can cover the same or higher mileage, but they can sustain a higher level of intensity that enables them to travel more high intensity distance, let's say 1 kilometer. Having said all of that, we can now understand that volume, or else known as total distance, isn't the defining quality that sets apart the different levels of football. Although this might be the case for lower level, amateur and youth football, the demands change the higher you go. Intensity and the ability to cover more high intensity distance is what really makes the difference between an amateur, a pro and an elite level player. After this extensive rant where I went over why jogging and steady-state cardio are quote-unquote worthless to a footballer after some point in their pursuit of pro football, I might as well cover the topic of when they can be useful, as I think that almost everything has a time and place in the development process. Let's start off with jogging. As we've already mentioned, jogging is a form of steady-state cardio that is executed at a really light pace. Although this form of conditioning is pretty much worthless to a footballer in terms of aerobic and anaerobic adaptations, it can be a really great tool to enhance the recovery process resources after a hard training session, a workout, or a game. One of the objectives of post-game recovery is to recover actively and increase blood flow to oxygenate muscle cells, deliver more nutrients to them, as well as flush out waste products much faster. Jogging for 10 to 20 minutes, 1 or 2 days after a game can help you actively recover without draining your already drained energy resources. So yeah, if you want to jog to recover, feel free to do that. It is effective. Now, in terms of steady state cardio at a higher pace, which is also known as power running, we know that this form of training also has a time and place in the training process. A player or coach can use this form of conditioning in various instances. All of them have a common goal: establish or re-establish an aerobic capacity that meets the demands of a football game. This is absolutely fundamental and can't be avoided. This training goal is really common amongst injured players that return to sport, players that have a pretty low training age, as well as the early phases of an off or preseason training block where most players need to gradually ramp up the intensity to lower the risk of injury and smoothly transition into the competitive season. However, if you have been using steady state runs for months or even years, I would highly suggest you rethink your development strategy. One of our core values is to provide players with ways to work smart and avoid the negative consequences the extreme end of hard work can have on your body and mind. Although steady state runs might be challenging and hard if you are running at a relatively fast pace or for much time, they definitely aren't the smartest way to approach the training process, for the sole reason that the energy systems these runs are targeting aren't the ones we want to develop in order to reach the elite level. As we've said, intensity will make the difference the higher you go up the football ranks in comparison to total volume, which undoubtedly is the defining quality in lower tier football, where the strength and conditioning level of players isn't quite that big. It is wise to say that you should build your base, aka your aerobic capacity, if you haven't already established it. Once you have that set at a good level, you will need to progressively build your neuromuscular and cardiovascular system's ability to sustain more high intensity distance and effort. This can be done in a handful of ways, which we will go over in another video. However, to name a few, intensity can be built with high intensity intervals, power and strength training, speed training, building energy efficient movement, and of course, by playing the actual game in any way possible, and therefore increasing your speed of play and your work rate. In fact, if you want to develop your speed of play, I'm absolutely sure you're gonna love the video that will pop up on your screen, so make sure to check that out as well. This was another episode of the Underrated Overrated series brought to you by FootXFit. If you liked it, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your teammates. We would also love to hear your thoughts on what the next topic of this series should be. Have a good one.